Okay, I think we're live. I don't know what to do at this period.
Introduction. Do you want me to do it?
Let me just double check everything.
I'll leave it to you guys. I'll just sit here twiddling my thumbs.
That's okay. Even if there's nobody here, we can start. I think this will be saved on YouTube. I didn't really promote this. Whatever. Okay, so we are just going to. I think we're just gonna wait and see if there's anybody here.
Okay. Me, I realize I haven't done any promo. I'll go and promo it now.
That's all right.
I should have did a new tweet instead of retweeting that old tweet.
That's okay. I've been so slammed lately, really. I'll just start.
Yeah.
There we go. Hopefully that'll
get the butts in the seats.
Yes. There we go. Okay. We'll see.
Oh, how is your book going? So what's?
Oh yeah, so I actually by the end of today I need to sign off on the final set. So we've been working on it's been in production now for the last two months. So been addressing like the little nitty-gritty. So yeah, I just need to go through the file one last time to make sure that everything is sitting properly, no typos, it's all formatted correctly. And then we'll send it off for indexing. They've moved the publication forward to October. It was originally November. So yeah, it's all done. And will be out in the world very, very shortly at a slightly more expensive price than I would have liked it to be. But they decided to release it in hardback first, which I'm not too pleased about, but oh well.
Are they also going to do a digital copy?
There is a digital copy, which I think most people will be wanting rather than the hardback for sure. The problem is that it costs only like $10 less than the hardback, so they're not. They haven't priced it very well, I think. And that's the kind of thing that's outside of authorial control. But yeah, no, they might. I am actually exploring some open access options, so we'll see. But that takes time.
The one thing I found out, I really learned in my time in university was that when professors write a paper or whatever to a journal and stuff like that, instead of going through the paywall, if you can't afford it, go to them and they're willing to give you their
exactly. I mean, I literally just said, I have a PDF of that book. Nudge, nudge.
Right. Which is
like, I mean, I guess I should say as a member of the academic community that you should absolutely never, ever, ever use GitHub or I mean, like, so you're exactly right. I just want my book read. I don't make any money from it, so I just can't like, so for my articles, yeah, I do actually post them up online eventually. I can't do that for my books because I have a contract that they would slap me down with, but I do have the discretion or ability to share it.
Right.
Yeah. If I so desire. So yeah.
I guess we'll just get going.
Okay.
We'll just get going. I don't even know. Okay, so we're here to gather today with Dr. Thomas
Dearly beloved.
to talk about the life of BLs and activism. Obviously, it's Pride Month in the US, and I don't know how international it is, but I'm guessing they're celebrating it in Thailand as well.
They most certainly do.
So I thought it would be a good time to talk about the topic because you've been doing some research, I believe, into it, and I think recently we've seen a bit more acceleration or momentum with BL and queer activism and themes. So I think it's an interesting topic to explore. One of the main things I think when it comes to queer activism and the growing momentum is the influence of corporate corporate involvement and corporate sponsorship and corporate social messaging, and which is great to have, obviously allies or whoever supporting a cause. But I think there's a voice, I guess, in the Western world, which is unsure about whether or not these corporates pride supports messages are authentic or not.
Yeah.
So I want to bring that to Asia and BL, and I want to ask you, when it comes to, let's say, GMMTV, and for me, they haven't had a squeaky clean record necessarily of and progress, and especially because this year there's been a few scandals. I remember even just looking at the Twitter, and there's still people bringing up Chris' initial.
I do have thoughts on that. Yeah, but yeah, you're quite right. Yeah. I think I even shared in a previous conversation I've had with the both of you that whilst GMM TV in some regards has a somewhat more youth focused and more, definitely its talents align and subscribe more to let's say a progressive style of politics. The broader corporation under which it sits, GMM Grammy, is a hugely conservative media monopoly in Thailand that is very firmly aligned with the powers that be, and this does then lead to issues. But I think that talking about the concept of corporate pride is a good point to start at, because as you rightly point out, Edison, and I'm going to ask DC for his thoughts in a minute. Because there's something that I think that's important. It has been within the North American, in particular, queer studies literature, received quite a lot of negative press, right? In the sense that corporate pride is part of a broader structure of so-called corporate responsibility, in which corporations pay supposed lip service to reaching out to and supporting minorities in order to simply court their buying power. Particularly for LGBTQ consumers, and especially in the North American context, gay men, who are a heavy consumer group. There has always been a criticism that corporate pride dilutes the messages of pride, in the sense that it's all about kind of bringing queerness or LGBTQ consumers into the consumer market and then transforming them into and integrating them into the capitalist systems that sit within North America. And I think that there is a compelling argument around that, once again, within a media context and a societal context where until recently, there has been very strong legal protections for LGBTQ plus folks and other marginalized communities. But with recent events in the US, where we're seeing Target pulling Pride materials in response to backlash against transphobia, where we see news suggesting that Starbucks is forbidding staff members to share Pride material, in which we've seen the boycott of Budweiser, not over its taste, but over its very spurious links with a trans actress and influencer. Like, I think that where we're seeing the erosion of corporate pride in North America actually demonstrates something about the utility of corporate pride in some regards, because it shows you that when a corporation is willing to kind of push back against the mainstream, like their alignment is with the almighty dollar, right? So this has always been something that, like, I think we need to start thinking about corporate pride and authenticity politics a little bit more carefully now that we're seeing this happening in North America. But the flip side is that within a context like Thailand, where mainstream support of same-sex marriage and LGBTQ rights has increased in recent years, especially amongst young people, and as the recent Thai election very clearly demonstrates, the party that won that election, though whether they form government or not is a separate question, one of their clear campaign promises and what they have a mandate for is the introduction of marriage equality in 100 days of assuming office, and the introduction of an LGBTQ plus anti-discrimination bill, right? So, like, it's quite interesting to me to see the so-called bastion of progressive moral values, i.e. the United States, cough, cough, backsliding, while the conservative so-called backwards Asian market, Thailand, is not. And I think that, in my mind, this is why we've seen some shifts, even with corporates perhaps still engaging in that problematic, like, is it authentic or not? I think from my perspective, what we have seen in Thailand is a very bottom-up kind of phenomenon, and also the active participation in the BL industry of self-identified LGBTQ plus content creators, such as the directors, some of the directors at GMMTV, P Jojo, P Alf, etc., who view BL as a vehicle for political messaging. Pinucci, sorry, there's another one, Tanoan as well. But at the same time, you see young stars active in the industry who utilize their platforms, their personal platforms. So it's not kind of corporate sponsorship, but they use their personal platforms to advocate. And then, yes, we do have kind of debates and concerns over past remarks of particular stars active in the industry. But I think it's always important to remember that perhaps being active in the industry gives them an opportunity to learn and develop and flourish. So, as I said, I'm interested in DC's thoughts because you are embedded in nightmare scape of the United States, and what you think about some of this and what's going on, and kind of comparing it a little bit perhaps to what's happening in Thailand. And then, BL in other markets is very different once again, and I think we'll get to that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this earlier because we started calling it pink dollar, because the corporations wanted that pink dollar and they were courting the LGBTQ community. However, what we're only noticing today is a backlash of 30 years, because it started happening in the 90s before marriage equality and things like that. And while it now it's easy to criticize it but it deserves some of the critique. However, it was a useful vehicle to get some rights moving in here and there. However, of course, there is also, as you mentioned, I think Halperin and his argument about homonormativity. And I'm sorry,
Lisa Duggan.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. So please, Dr. Duggan, don't hurt me. but and all of that, trying to get them a part of the nation state. But I'm like, okay, I see some similarities, but also I see some differences, because one of my arguments for the homonormativity and bringing the U.S. queer culture in is that you're going to have to cut out some of the LGBT community, and you see of them left behind, such as queer people of color, disabled people, and all this other kind of stuff. However, for me and what I was thinking, this is just it doesn't really quite fit on a place where I see as more ethno-national, where the U.S. is more like a nation state comprised of a different people, like individual communities. Still, like there's so much overlapping and different communities. So because I have different identities right here, and they're all fighting, but I don't know enough about Thailand to say that is the same thing that they have in. So I see it as, if this is the start of a 30-year trend, they don't have to worry about that anytime soon, which is like, you have like a generation, you can't, and also just putting the same critiques. Especially as a student of international relations, I'm really hesitant to say, okay, one critique fits all, especially when it's a social critique. And socially, things developed and they have their own like history, and you have to find out why. And that's why I also love post-colonialism. But I don't know, that was all over the place and not really.
No. I mean, it hits. Yeah, it hits a lot of what I think about. I mean, I think in both of the conversations I've had with you guys previously, I've been quite upfront about the fact that we can't take, North American or Western European queer theory and simply plop it down on Thailand to make sense of what's going on, or indeed other contexts, and that we do need to be sensitive to some of what's going on. I think that one thing to always remember about Thailand, and we've spoken about this before, I know, but it's not some LGBTQ plus paradise, despite it selling itself that way to a particular kind of white Western sex tourist, or selling itself through fandom, as it is increasingly beginning to do. But what Thailand has at the cornerstone of its as you mentioned, the ethno-nationalist discourse, is that it is a nation of the Thai people united under the auspices of a Buddhist royalty, right? And that this is tied to a notion of Thai-ness, what in Thai language is a Kwang Ben Thai, that is strongly linked to heteronormativity, and also the idea that wealth and prosperity comes from the kind of patriarchal state where the king is father, right? And then this introduction of BL culture has, I've argued in my forthcoming book, and also within the context of thinking about activism and pride and so forth, has disrupted this regime, has disrupted this kind of thinking. And I put it this way, that the Thai youth protests of the 2020s that has eventually led to the success of the Move Forward Party in the most recent elections is grounded in a changing notion of what Thailand is and what it means to be Thai. And BL has a role to play within that broader narrative, and the rise of an activist kind of potential within BL celebrity culture and encoded within BL fandom itself has been part of that. So I think, I 100% take that point that, we can look back on the pink dollar and authenticity politics and corporate pride and so forth with the benefit in the United States of 30 years of hindsight, right? But I think that we need to be kind of looking at what's happening in Thailand from the historical moment that it is currently debating. And as I've flagged in previous discussions with you, as I talk about in a lot of my scholarship and a lot of my public kind of engagement as well, there's this fundamental belief sometimes, and this is going to sound really crazy because, you know, politically I'm quite socialist, but I know the dangerous word, but like this idea that capitalism is inherently dangerous neglects that it can create spaces of enunciation. And within the Thai BL context, the success of the Thai BL industry and its mainstreaming has opened up spaces of discussion that activists can use, even if they are for or against the BL industry. My point is that it has opened up a space in which those debates can occur. And that's actually really, really important. Because yes, that space existed prior to BL, of course it did. Like, to say that LGBTQ activism has only become revitalized because of Thai BL is ridiculous, because there's decades of activism that comes before that, right? But it has pushed it into the zeitgeist, and it's pushed it into the forefront of young people's minds just because it's such a significant consumer culture. And then you have like people active in it who either say very stupid things or demonstrate a very clear commitment to good progressive politics in their personal lives. And then you have the series that are beginning to incorporate activist and other forms of social rights messaging within the series themselves. And I think that that's what the transformation that I've been observing over the last kind of like since late 2021 in particular. The watershed moment was the broadcast of the series Not Me, starring Off Jumpon and Gan Atapan, and directed by a trans director named Pinucci. And this, you know, famously had the scene where they attended an LGBTQ, like a pride rally with a waving rainbow flag and everything. And the series was an allegory of the Thai youth protests that were raging at the time, a very clever one. And like, from my perspective, like, yes, we had seen kind of discussions of kind of, you know, discrimination and the need, like the lack of marriage rights and so forth. But it was that series that inaugurated the idea that, okay, BL should have some form of political messaging within it. And up until then, BL was mostly based around just kind of fantastic romantic narratives. But now within most BL series, not all, but most, we're seeing some kind of gesturing towards political issues, whether it be Z Nunu kind of talking about getting married and why that's important in a bathtub in Cutie Pie, or whether it is the alternative the alternative world depicted in Vice Versa, in which gay men can get married, and we have Force and Book kind of showing that to see Tawanan. I don't remember their character names. Or more recently, once again, Force Book in A Boss and a Babe, where in the second episode of that series, which was light, fun, fluffy, and very silly, you had the character the book played, Cher, kind of criticizing his co-workers for gossiping about their openly gay boss, and then saying, have you signed the marriage equality petition? I'll send you it. And then, like, do you like BL series? Oh yeah, they're cute. So if you like BL series, why aren't you supporting like gay people? Why are you gossiping about them? And like, we've reached a moment where that's rather, I think, authentically kind of depicted in the series. And it's not, I don't think that it's just some kind of pinkwashing corporate pride per se, because it's not so much. I mean, this is a company that's been forced to perform good politics by fans who expect it to perform good politics. And you've also got, as I said, very progressive young stars and LGBTQ creatives behind the camera who are also wanting this to be reflective of their politics. And I think that transformation could not have happened until BL had become mainstream itself. So yes, there's issues in the kind of corporatization of queer representation. And whilst I don't think it's a useful term, I know queer baiting gets thrown around a lot, and we unpacked that a lot last time, so I don't really want to talk about it in much depth today. But like, I think that these shifts are really, quite interesting. At least, we're seeing some transformation, and like in Thailand, other BL markets, South Korea and Japan, for instance, not so much.
I noticed that even in Our Sky 2, at the end of it, Earth Mix, uh, which like it was just like, oh, and especially just seeing them trying to, you're like, okay, do you want to get married and things about that suggestion. And that was, I think, especially for us Earth Mix stands out there, especially seeing just like
You mean they're not
them,
already married?
right? I'm not saying that, but just to see them together again and again and again, and just that being like, it's almost like a bookend to their relationship of like,
Yeah,
okay, this is what they've been going towards in all of their series, from 1,000 to Cupid's Last Wish to all this
yeah.
other kind of stuff, and seeing that ship together, and you're like, okay, this is right.
And I think it's more than just a simple like, okay, so a romantic kind of in the context of genre fiction, romance narratives tend to move towards weddings as a way to consolidate and represent the ultimate kind of transcending power of love, blah 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 blah. Yeah, you could go down that route, but I think that like back in the day, this was not necessarily the way that directions would go. And more importantly, these narratives are being presented within a socio-cultural legal context, Thailand, where it cannot legally take place yet. Even though we have a government, an incoming government, potentially, we can never, Thailand is not exactly the strongest democracy in the world. But like we can never, like, I don't think we can just say that, oh, this is just some kind of simplistic romantic wish fulfillment. No, it is very firmly embedded within a politics. And it's a politics that I believe does have an activist potential. It certainly is queer because it challenges the fundamental notion in the Thai legal system, its constitution, and its culture that only male-female couples are productive and useful for the state, right? So I think that this is significant. And as you're quite right, we can then embed it within, for example, Mick Sahapap's long personal commitment to activism, that he's not just, grounded in what some people I think quite incorrectly call performative social media activism. This is someone who has been actively attending events in his personal capacity, not as a star, in his personal capacity. And like has been, he was even at one stage potentially going to be brought before the law. If you remember back during the height of the student protest movement, when the young Thai rapper Millie was taken to a police station and censored for some of her criticisms of the government's handling of COVID-19, and was even threatened with potential lèse-majesté, the infamous law in Thailand that has heavy criminal penalties for speaking negatively about the royal family. Mix was also on a kind of blacklist. And this is, I think, significant because yes, they did that wonderful pre-wedding photo shoot that was an advertisement for Cornetto's, but it's also embedded within Earth and Mix's, particularly Mix's, personal politics that he doesn't hide. It's open and there for anyone to see. And I think that that's significant because it means that, yes, we could read this as just some kind of simplistic wish fulfillment within the context of series. It's kind of like, oh yeah, all those fans are going to go gaga because they're going to get married. But no, it's there's more to it than that. And in the work that I'm doing now, which I'll be presenting in a more developed form at an upcoming conference, and then writing it up in the way academics do. But what I'm really looking at now is how the effective structures of BL, the kind of shipping culture and the ways in which this is encoded into a particular system of producing what's known as fin, this emotional resonance, central to the stage homoeroticism of BL, has now been turned. Usually in the past, it was used to sell things, right? Oishi, honey, lemon, 0% tea. Whereas now it's being used to push marriage equality. And I think that that's a really, really, really good thing. And I think that if we bog ourselves down in too much kind of purity or authenticity politics, in the kind of Western queer critical tradition, we neglect the fundamental point of queer theory, which is about challenging norms. And even if this is possibly got a marketing or capitalistic undertone, it doesn't change the fact that it is part of a broader shift in cultural values, particularly amongst young people. And that's like, and like basically the recent election is clear indication of this. Every single party in that election had an LGBTQ plus platform that was around anti-discrimination and the introduction of some kind of legal recognition of relationships. Not all of those parties were putting forward a marriage equality bill. Some of them were introducing a separate system of civil unions. They were the people who lost. But it was part of that broader conversation around LGBTQ plus issues that BL has been an active part of in the last 5 to 6 years in Thailand.
I think, and just bringing it back to this, the one that I know most about American environment, yeah. I think especially with the want of it being a scene with the pink dollar and corporations taking notice is because that came out of the 80s where you had the AIDS epidemic and that was going bad because they were invisible. They were totally invisible. And like even the president at the time wouldn't say it, HIV or AIDS, you know, like, so visibility became a thing. And of course that was after the heels of the 70s. And so there's a history. And so that's why I like the American history and stuff like that. But getting that visibility, just simply saying, hey, I'm here, as opposed to when you weren't. They didn't even notice you at all.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Pride's all about, right?
Right. And then, okay, you're here, so you're not shutting up. So let's do something. Give you a little bit. And like progress is measured in like sometimes decades. And just it's not just, okay, this is going to happen, all right, this is going to happen, but it's the long arc of history, you know. So
yeah, I mean, I think to use the United States as a kind of comparative point is useful because of two things. One, the dominant theoretical paradigms that exist to make sense of this are North American, like they come out of the US, and two, there's still a belief that circulates that that's the best model. And as I said, the recent erosion of rights and particularly the rampant kind of transphobia and moral panics that we're seeing emerging in the States right now, including the repeal of Roe v. Wade. And like, I don't think I need to kind of convince you of this, DC, but like this idea, for instance, that, okay, so after the Civil War, the Constitution was amended to abolish slavery. And that hence the problem is fixed, right? No. And this is the idea that I think people forget that history has, to put on my academic hat, we call it the longue durée, right? So the long processes of history. And these are processes of history that often don't necessarily play out in one person's lifetime. So when a movement begins, of course, it's not going to be perfect. In fact, nothing can ever be perfect. So it moves towards a point of development, and that occasionally has backlash and slippages. But is it useful from a political perspective, I would ask, to demand perfection at the beginning of a movement or a beginning of a change when that change has already had to fight such an uphill battle to just introduce, for example, visibility? And this is one of the things that I think that frustrates me in some of the simplistic reads of LGBTQ plus politics vis-a-vis BL within Thailand, is that people demand perfection of a system that is still developing. Like, yes, now Thai BL has like about 10 to 15 years of history, right? But that's still, you know, to utilize that kind of US history. You know, it took the whole of the 90s to reach a moment when pink capitalism in the 2000s could make sense, right? That's 10 years after the AIDS crisis and the shameful kind of actions of Reagan, who I will name in order to shame him terribly, and etc. Like so like I think that this is important, and to be quite honest, I don't expect fans to be aware of these histories and to understand them. I guess my job as an academic who works within this space is to do that work and then share it, right? So this is where I come from, and this is why I'm, at least in the Thai context, and as I said, other BL markets are very different and not at all like South Korea's BL market, like the rampant homophobia that we see embedded into South Korean society, including over like the very ability to hold queer culture events, which is the Korean language equivalent of a pride event, where the homophobic mayors, openly homophobic mayors of all the major cities of Seoul, have signed orders that have either forbidden use of public property for queer culture festivals, or taken like their own city councils to court in order to frustrate the use of queer culture festivals. BL in this market is not in a position yet to step into that debate, because there are much more important things to be worried about within that particular context, right? And also BL doesn't have the capacity yet to actively contribute, except in a few limited situations. Likewise, Japan, well, yeah, Japan. Long history of BL that has been so carefully sequestered away from like the LGBTQ plus market through years of strategic advertisements that creates this kind of fantasy of BL only appealing to and being sold to women, has, notice the word fantasy there because that's not at all true, has made it very difficult. And then within the Korean and Japanese contexts, celebrity culture is grounded in those celebrities being explicitly apolitical, right? Whereas Thailand has had a long history of politicized celebrities. The thing that's interesting, though, is that they have typically been aligning with the status quo, right? So during previous political unrest in Thailand, between the famous yellow shirt royalists and the red shirt supporters of the kind of Thaksin Shinawatra aligned populist politics of the late 90s, early 2000s. Like you had your yellow celebrities and your red celebrities, but it was really the yellow celebrities, the people aligned with the monarchy and the military and the status quo, who were the dominant force, right? And that's partly why coups have been successful in that context, because popular culture has often thrown itself behind them. One of the bastions of that kind of activist celebrity, the kind of reactionary conservative celebrities in Thailand, was always GMM Grammy. So to see GMM TV align with the orange wave of the Move Forward Party at a time when that corporation has always been conservative is quite interesting within the broader history of Thai celebrity culture. But then, as I said, you've got K-pop and J-pop and those consumer markets where to be political in any way, shape, or form is so dangerous to the career that, like, idols they're not allowed to have personal opinions, right? Like, if you get what I mean. Like, whereas in Thailand, yeah, they can get away with it. And that's why you can have Mick Sahapap angrily tweeting at politicians.
And this is a country that we never bring up, but we should bring up, the Philippines.
Yes.
Especially Game Boys stars. They were, especially during the last election. Well, two of them, the main boys, Kakoi and I forgot the other guy.
Terrence
They were like all for the Marco's opponent. I forget her name. They were out there like campaigning for this.
Yeah.
And also,
Come pink.
yes.
Yeah.
Also, I see. I forgot.
Lenny Robredo, by the way.
Yes. And so they're out there, and while they are, it's not this a big of a juggernaut as Thailand, and as not as like the Korea, South Korea, and Japan. However, I've noticed that a lot of the stars or the people who star in Filipino BLs, they do keep their autonomy, especially on social media and things like that, and speak out.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Philippine BL is the other market. I'm glad you brought it up. I was eventually going to get to it, but I'm glad you brought it up. Can you see my little, wait, it's over here, my Game Boys thing. There it is. Above my table.
Yeah.
I'm pointing at it. There we go. No, I'm pointing at it with my head. It's above my head. I have my signed. It's signed by the boys as well. But like, so right from the outset, one of the things, like, Philippine BL has been political, very political, and very firmly tied to the LGBTQ plus kind of debates and policies and activist networks in the Philippines. Partly because BL in the Philippines has emerged through those who are active within the kind of queer indie movement, utilizing BL, the popularity of BL in 2020, sparked by the widespread kind of interest in GMMTV's series that occurred during COVID, as a site to kind of, okay, we've been producing this stuff at the in our indie spaces for a long time now, often sometimes even decades. Let's use BL to once again bring it more into mainstream awareness. And one of the things that I think that frustrated me was then they would then say, and let's correct BL by injecting kind of gay male activist sentiments. But let's put that aside for now, because I think that once again, that's just about authenticity politics, and there's a broader Philippine-based history for why that happened. But yes, I think that it's significant actually that we're seeing the Southeast Asian BL markets that are most prominent, Thailand and the Philippines, being more aligned with activist concerns than others. I mean, that's also true of some of the stuff coming out of Singapore, which is very small, but I also don't really want to shout out that company right now, because they they used an AI chatbot to write the script for their most recent series, and that's not good politics. But the thing is that, like, those are these are illiberal countries that do not have firm democratic systems, that have long histories of revolution and not so much Singapore, of course, and activism. Once again, not so much Singapore, of course. But like, there is an activist. I mean, there's actually arguments within Philippine studies that I find quite compelling, that there is, since the period of martial law and the people power revolution of the mid-80s, within Philippine society, there is a certain activist pull that exists. And one thing that's important to note from our external position, we see the populism of Rodrigo Duterte and the return of the Marcoses through the election of Bongbong Marcos as like an erosion of potential activism. But the people who are active within that movement, perhaps misguisedly, view themselves as activists, kind of pushing back against a corrupt establishment. But the fact of the matter is that Philippine media culture is replete with activism, and BL in particular is very firmly tied to that. And not just in the context of gay male creators producing indie content. It's also, queer women, and indeed young women who may be heterosexual, engaging in BL as a feminist space within the Philippines. Highly Catholic heteronormative society that denies sexual and romantic autonomy to women. Like, they use BL as consumers. Like, I've written some book chapters on how fandom for Japanese BL within the context of the Philippines has an activist potential, for instance, in the sense that through consuming it and participating in that fandom culture in the Philippine context, you frustrate some of those dominant kind of historical, socio-cultural, legal systems that suppress queerness and like womanhood, and that reading manga comics about two hot guys bonking like can actually be a political act within that context. And like that's, I think, really significant as well. Like we tend to think about activism as taking to the streets and advocating for, you know, legal change and human rights, but the very act of opening up a BL manga or watching a BL series in a society in which that kind of expression has been maligned is a political act, right? And I think that that's significant. And I think that this is often neglected in the debate, in the sense that when a young fangirl of Danmei in China goes crazy over Wang Yibo and Xiaozhan from The Untamed and writes a fan fiction in which they get up to some incredibly filthy stuff in a society where that kind of thing is explicitly against the law, that fan fiction becomes a political act, and it's resistance in a society in which resistance is extraordinarily difficult to do, in that let's take to the streets and apply a pride flag. And this is the other thing that, as I said, is really important when we talk about BL. BL is political because everything we do is political. And that means that the choice to consume and enjoy is queer in the theoretical sense. It frustrates normative systems of oppression, particularly those faced by those whose gender and sexuality contrasts with compulsory heteronormativity and so forth. So yeah, so yes, if you're out there, I don't know how many viewers are there, but like if you're out there reading porn, fan fictions and watching hot series, yay, you're an activist in my book.
I also, another thing that I remember with Boss and the Babe, and it was a light, fluffy, hard-hitting series. It's surprisingly, because I want to say also it talked about conversion therapy. And they brought up conversion therapy, in which his mom sent him to conversion therapy, and he didn't. While it didn't, like, I just haven't seen that brought up in BL, even though I haven't. And then also, what else? They were talking about all this other kind of stuff where it was like snuck in, and I think that's what BL does. It kind of sneaks stuff in, you're like feeling for these characters, and you're like, what they're going through is wrong. And then all of a sudden, somebody else, what you're going through is wrong, because you know, the people that I know, the only queer people that I know on this TV screen who I feel for, you know, what you're going through. Okay, this is because when something is going on out there, you really don't care. But when you bring it in close to home and you're not associated with it, you care a little bit more, or there's a reason, they give you a reason to care. So yeah, and also existence is revolutionary. So
I mean in some regards you can kind of consider this as a form of culture jamming, where you kind of throw like a little bit of something into the broader cultural system that disrupts the way that cultural system works. So it's like, if you're ever, like, the way that when I teach culture jamming to my students, the way that I do it is like, imagine that you're in a packed kind of station, train station, and everyone's walking one way towards the like the crowd is moving towards the train, and you decide to turn around and walk the other way. That causes a disruption in the movement, and the more people who choose to do that, the more disruption that it occurs. That's a culture jam, because what you're doing is that you're frustrating the ways in which things are designed to flow. So likewise, BL, in most of the contexts where it occurs, is a form of culture jamming, because all of these cultures are heteronormative, and they are media, particularly in East and Southeast Asia, the media marketplaces are shockingly heteronormative. Like, I like to think about, like, yes, we're not going to have necessarily the actors in BL web series from South Korea out there at pride parades, though I'll say a little bit about this a little bit further. But with, like, the K-drama is extraordinarily conservative in its representations of gender and its narratives of romance, right? Shockingly conservative. But if you take that kind of representational system and then make it about two men, in Korea, that's a culture jam, because it then suggests that this conservative romantic narrative that the media spoon feeds you every single day is possible between two men. That's a huge culture jam, even if it might lead to problematic representations of what a male-male couple would look like in the real world, the so-called semeuke rule, etc. But in that cultural milieu, within that particular cultural context, it is a culture jam. Likewise, yeah, you're not going to have a K-pop star active in a BL series such as, for example, Jae-chan from DKZ, or more recently, Juho from SF9. Both have appeared, and Gongchan from B1A4, who've all appeared in BL series. They're not going to say, you know, queer rights, LGBTQ pride, blah, 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 but they might say something like, I don't see love as gendered, or I don't necessarily think that there's any problem if people love themselves or who they love, because love is love. Like, yeah, that could appear wishy-washy to some people, but in that cultural context, it's a culture jam. And that's actually really, really significant. And I think that, like for those people who don't understand or aren't necessarily fully familiar with the socio-cultural systems that dominate, for example, Korean celebrity culture, to have Jae-chan kind of openly and very frequently talking about, like, pushing back against the masculinist tropes that structure South Korean media, and then talking about how he doesn't necessarily find anything wrong with falling in love with a man and appearing in the drama as a way to give a certain kind of representation to that. In South Korea, that's revolutionary. So I think that this is the other thing that people need to think about, is, like, what does activism look like in particular contexts? Because it isn't necessarily always going to be Stonewall riots, right? Yet. Though there is a place for that. There's always a place for that. And that's the other thing that I often think about. So that's just to address the South Korean context, which often gets kind of criticized for being as being the least, let's say, politically active. I actually think that would more likely be Japan. Yeah, like in South Korea, you've got carefully structured ways of demonstrating that politics I was referring to, but that functions within that society. And then hopefully, like in Thailand, the momentum continues and we see change.
Yeah.
Explicit acts.
Even though I know, and this is what I was thinking, even though we have this whole, like, okay, well, you know, the masculine and one feminine relationship is really bad. Even in that, you still have this idea that any masculine tagged individual is always supposed to be this. So even if one masculine is all of a sudden becoming feminine, that is an attack on the heteronormative system, because there's supposed to be there's a division in gendered ways, and gender existence and gendered labor. And so when you have two gay individuals, you don't have that division of gendered labor within the relationship. It's actually it's divided by the same gender. that is an attack on heteronormativity, because it's like, okay, the masculine gender can only do this type of labor, and the feminine gender can only do this type of labor, which is an emotional labor, which is gendered work and all this other kind of stuff. And even if you look at the home, even if you look at the home as a spaces and that gender labor within there, you have the wife who cooks and cleans, who's the feminine gender, and the masculine, which is like breadwinner and all this other kind of stuff. And homosexual relationships attack that. So even with the, okay, this is bad with the uskre and stuff like that, it still does. It may not, it may not. I think sometimes people want it to do everything. You're supposed to do everything right now.
It's like what I was saying before. Nothing can be perfect, right? And hence, like my position as a scholar is that there's been too much focus on the critique and not enough on the celebration of potential. And DC, what you were saying about cooking made me realize, recently a lot of the BL series coming out of Japan have been focusing on cooking men, right? Or cooking women. And like in Japan, like I can't stress this enough. The trope of the cooking man is an important feminist trope, because like within a lot of feminist media, like the use of a man who can cook and take care of like the household and then the woman is attracted to that is because it pushes back against decades of idea that men need their wife to cook for them, and hence they need to be cared for. And like the fact that one of the kind of what I think is one of the strongest kind of queer texts to come out of Japan in recent years is Kino nani tabeta, like what did you eat yesterday?
Yeah.
Yoshinaga Fumi, who is Yoshinaga Fumi is a giant of queer and feminist literature. Like not just Kino nani tabeta, what did you eat yesterday, but Ooku, where she reimagines the court of the shogun as being gender swapped. So the shogun is a woman and her harem is men. Like that, like she has consistently in her work, I don't know. Oh, this way. This is my Kino nani tabeta dojinshi that I got from her hand, which I won't open because it's definitely going to get you demonetized. But
I have my copy upstairs. Not from her.
But yeah, but this is the thing. Like this, so this is Kenji Toshiro-san, number 2. But like what I loved about it is that Kenji's the top, right, and like that in itself is a frustration because he's the effeminate one, right? So, so yeah. Once again, Yoshinaga Fumi, queer activist, 100%. So you don't need to be a Tagame Gengoro, in my mind, the author of BDSM gay male comics with a particular aesthetic that I don't personally find very resonant, to be an activist in Japan. You can be Yoshinaga Fumi is very coy about whether she's a BL author or not, but like you can be a publisher of homoerotica who identifies as a straight woman in Japan and be a queer activist, as far as I'm concerned, and a feminist. Like she's yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, we definitely finished watching Our Dining Table, and I didn't put like words to it, but it definitely felt revolutionary and an activist moment towards the end, and the acceptance of like, family and including a child in the unit. So that was
I think that's actually one of the things. So I'm going to be on record here happily of being not a big fan of Tagame Gengoro's My Younger Brother's Husband, or My Brother's Husband, I think is the official English translation. Ototo no Oto. But the one thing that I think that it does well is that it represents a new form of the family. Whether it's like I find it's queer kind of it's focus, it's discussion of gay culture and so forth, very didactic and also much too aligned with Tagame's own personal desires to be useful as a kind of broader text for everyone in Japan, but its reimagining of what a family can look like is really, really revolutionary in Japan, like extraordinarily so. And likewise, Our Dining Table did exactly the same thing. And that's important, because when you think about what the backlash against LGBTQ plus people is in America, right? What's it grounded in? So-called child grooming again. So like this notion that like so a series produced out of East Asia or Southeast Asia that depicts, like, it's like the Our Sky vice versa episode with Pern and Tele, my beloved Jimmy C, and their little baby Jigsaw, right? Like, that was like, to me, that was, so yes, it was perhaps the least watched episode. Maybe people don't have the same taste that I have, but so I am a 100% Jimmy C apologist. But like, that was like the most political of all of them. Like, you know, yeah, sure, Jung and Dunk had like kissed each other 30 times, great, but like this series, like that, those two episodes were looking like, it was just not even considered like a problem that two men could become the dads of a young boy, even if it does turn out to be your friend's nephew. But like, you know what I mean? Like that's hugely significant. And I think that this once again shows us different forms of activism, like LGBTQ plus activism and pride and so forth, can be about talking about what a family can look like, right? And providing alternative models of family, but also more importantly, pushing back against the narrative that gay men, for instance, are a danger to children, because here we have narratives where they're most clearly not. They're nurturing, they're loving, they're fathers and mothers all at once. And that's, I think, really good, because in the Japanese context, to go back to our dining table, where everything is so firmly grounded in the idea that mummy does this and daddy does this, and in fact daddy doesn't really do much because mummy does everything. To have two men sharing the labor and then just have two men doing that nurturing shows that men can nurture, women don't have to nurture, and that a child can be perfectly happy without a mother. And that's actually in Japan, where you've got like the reason why the conservative government of Japan has been slow to enact same-sex marriage law, despite the fact that 73% of the population are in favor of it, is because their conservative nonsense is like, well, but if we introduce this, it will just make our aging birth, like our declining birth rate problem even worse. It's kind of like, no, not at all. Yeah.
That's because of the heteronormativity of making women forced to do all the work.
I mean, women are baby machines. Like, right. every like reform that is introduced to attempt to fix this problem is just about chucking money at people so women don't have to work, so they can spit out children.
But I also wanted to say that there is another side of this, in that, yes, is having this representation also shows to the wider culture that, oh yes, men could do this and all this other kind of stuff, but it also gives those individuals in the queer community that want to maybe have a relationship or something similar to what they grew up with, but yet have it in a queer relationship. Like, oh my goodness, so that means I can have a partner and do that kind of stuff.
So I'm not actually denied marriage or the potential of it. Yes, I could have children if I so desire. So yes, it also reaffirms the idea that if you want those things, you can have them, and that you're not excluded from them. And I think that's, yes. So the fact that this is happening within BL, like, it is just part and parcel of my broader argument that we should always consider BL to be queer media. Who cares who writes it? Who cares who it's written for? because ultimately the potential is there for it to frustrate, to culture jam. And that's why, that's why in my scholarship, I talk about BL being replete with queer potential. So from explicit LGBTQ activism in Thai BL to the more subtle forms of culture jamming and challenging of heteronormativity through the broader work of BL as what I call a resource of hope in a lot of my scholarship. It's promotion of utopian futures and the aspirations that you were just talking about, DC. I think that there's lots of activist potential in BL, and this resonates with many people. And it's like all media text; it's open to so many things, and it's more about what do the people working with it and working in it choose to do with it. And I think that that's significant. So if you want BL to be activist in some way, shape, or form, then you can make it activist as a consumer. And for instance, when you see a series that does introduce something problematic, for instance, that series coming out of Thailand with the incest and the pedophilia plot, advocate against it, right? Like, and show companies that no, you can't get away with this. Or if it's a series that was written by ChatGPT, don't engage, because your choice not to engage is activism as well.
Queer men can also be in the mafia, so there's that. I guess I don't even know if that show was political or not. Anyways, I have a question. Going back to mix and stuff, and it's just for like me, and I think a lot of people would feel like this. Obviously, I think when we watch BLs, we want to know that the actors are, politically or socially progressive or on our side. So I remember reading a tweet of yours in which like actors are kind of like covertly or subtly letting people know of their allyship or involvement in the LGBT community. And for example, like I still read so many comments about how Senior New is like real or not, or like they're giving away signs that they are. But regardless of that, like when we're thinking about watching Be My Favorite, and so like I'm on the fence about Chris, but like I think my question is, how do we like know for sure that these actors are, like not just doing it to revive their careers or like
I mean, one thing that I would say is that it's really important to never try and you need to engage in a certain amount of good faith. I mean, Chris, as many fans of his have kind of highlighted, has had a long history since that moment of him engaging in kind of potential hate speech, of basically demonstrating that he has moved and grown. Like, I don't believe, like I'm very firmly on the sense that the press conference he gave in response to all of this was very authentic. Like, he seemed extraordinarily upset. His apologies appeared to me to be quite sincere, and we have seen subsequent to that very, very kind of open attempts to demonstrate goodwill. I don't think that Chris is just getting into BL in order to revive a dead career, because that speaks to people who don't know about the fact that he's actually very successful in Thailand. So he doesn't need to revive his career because his career is established. For instance, he's the MC of a very, very, very popular mainstream music show, right? He still gets endorsements. So it's more about the way that I view. I mean, what I would say is that it was actually a calculated part on GMM's behalf to use Christ's return to boost their brand rather than him trying to revive his career, because he didn't need to. His career's fairly established. I actually think that it was also part of a part of GMM's attempts to keep him, to put it bluntly, because they lost Singto. And Chris has been, as I said, his music career and his MCing has been growing steadily to him having a mainstream recognition. So I think that GMM put him into this series to, one, be able to sell it to the Japanese market where he is extraordinarily popular, and two, bring him into their system so that it's like, actually the same is true with New Titipum with regards to Cherry Magic. Like, giving Cherry Magic to Tae was not about reviving Tae. It was about keeping GMM safe, because they needed to like, I mean, as a polka, like, believe me, if New had left, right, now he's back. So I think that this is important, but I think that we need to remember that people can grow and change, and participating within these industries is a way for them to learn, right? And I'm actually I'm actually generous of a young person making a flippant, silly, homophobic remark, because one thing, how do we know that this isn't internalized homophobia? To start with, we don't. And two, we've all said stupid things when we were young, right? And you shouldn't hold someone like, unless they have very firmly demonstrated that they have not improved themselves. So I think that one person that I would use here is Pon Narrowit, who, when he was in what was either middle school or high school, was like making anti comments about K-pop stars and calling them gay as a slur. Now, openly massive K-pop fan, heavily active within the BL industry, has been making comments about marriage equality and so forth, even outside of the context of Pride Month, and was very contrite and sincere in his apology for his past actions. Like, that's just a young kid saying something stupid. That's not a homophobe trying to capitalize off an industry. I think that that's how I would read it. People are free to read it however they want, but I think that if the outing, and I will return to this, and I know we talked about this last time, but I'll say it again. If the outing of Kit Connor has taught us anything, this obsessive purity politics and so forth that has crept into LGBTQ media consumption and debates is dangerous, because it's grounded in assumptions that may force people. I was speaking to a journalist recently about this, and they didn't quite get it, so I had to be quite blunt. You know, remember, Thailand, despite these changes, GMM Grammy as a company, remarkably conservative, aligned with the conservative forces in government and in the military. What do you think is going to happen if one of their stars comes out? They're not going to go to bat for them, right? So they can't come out. So we can't expect them to be openly anything yet. But in 100 days' time, maybe there's an anti-discrimination law introduced into Parliament that then allows these people to come out, right? So I think we need to be really, really careful of purity politics. And whilst I take your point that we want to see them performing good politics, people are human, and to be trite and cliched, to err is human, but to forgive, that's divine. And I think that we should be willing to let people make mistakes and learn from them. I don't want to sound like some right-wing nut job, but like, I'm not sure how useful cancel culture can be sometimes in this particular context. But when it comes to Christ, long, well documented history of making reparations, if you want to use that language, and I think that that's important.
We are running out of time, and there's so much more to discuss. We might close on a question someone's asked in the chat. Who wants to know? Kat Wilkes wants to know how consumers might be able to, or viewers of BL might be able to advocate for more progressive themes or BLs or stuff like that without having to go through social media, or like what are the avenues that they can take that necessarily aren't just Twitter?
That's a really good question, and there's one very, very easy thing to do: do not watch, not engage. And if a series seems to have poor politics, don't watch it. So you don't need to go up onto social media and scream about it. You turning it off, you not giving them money, you demonstrating to the capitalist systems that basically run the industry that these stories are not profitable will eventually lead them to stop making them. Right? The reason why we're seeing GMM including these narratives that are that are grounded in politics, progressiveness, and so forth is because they resonate with the fans and make money. Like, so this is the flip side of corporate pride. If it is indeed driven by the capitalist imperative, then the only imperative is, can it make money? If you can frustrate that politics of accumulation, then that's how you can be an activist. An activist can be an activist by not engaging, as well as by engaging. So I do that all the time. I didn't watch the Checkout, I didn't watch Checkout series because I did not want to give it air, right?
Yeah, it feels like the futures of a BL are either going to be both politically very progressive and representational, or just very Checkout or hot and heavy.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. So if you have a problem with the soft pornification of BL, then demonstrate that by not watching. I personally don't have a problem with it, but I am happily on brand as being incredibly shallow. So
why can't we have both? Like,
I mean, ¿por qué no los dos, right?
Is that just an Australian thing? I don't even know.
I don't know.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I think that
Spanish, like
no, but I thought I don't know.
It is an Australian ad, but it did go. It went viral. That little girl.
It did. Okay.
She's like in her late 20s now, just to kind of terrify you. Anyway.
Oh, we're both in our late 20s now.
I don't know how to wrap this up, but I wish we had more time to delve further.
Sorry, I have to dash to that meeting. I would love to keep talking, but yeah, as I said, end of semester, lots of stuff happening on my end. But I hope that people found my contributions useful. And as always, guys, thank you for having me on and giving me an opportunity to talk about all of this stuff in long form. I always appreciate it.
No, it's always a fun time and very insightful and informative. And I think personally, I'm a bit guilty of some of the things we talked about in terms of like expecting perfection and assigning or going, this could be more progressive in so and so way. So I think I'll try and keep in mind a bit more of the contextual stuff about shows and what they're able to do within their position. So I might be a bit more forgiving because we're watching The Warp Effect, and it's quite divided on some of the things there. So
The Warp Effect in Thailand is shockingly revolutionary and radical in Thailand. It's important to note. I mean, I'm a Polka new tragic, so like seeing new Titipum openly talking about sex, yeah, sure, go for it. Yeah. Okay.
I guess we'll just leave. Thanks for joining us, Thomas.
Thank you for having me. I'll leave now if you feel like wrapping things up, because I really do need to go to that next meeting. But thanks for having me.
See you, Tom.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. It's just us. Do you have any last thoughts, DC?
No, it was very informative and just situating things, and just have to realize that while we're still a part of there's a global community, we're still a part of the out group. And by taking note of, there's some things that we don't know what's going on, but it's still, revolutionary, and it is situated within a activism, but they're activists so far as they can be activists in their space. Because if they were anything more, you wouldn't hear from them anymore. So that's what sometimes people can do what they can do. So
Definitely. We didn't even get to go into like all the BLs that were, I would say, hallmarks of transformative or progressive politics. And obviously there was Not Me, there was The Eclipse. I mean, I'm still watching Miracle of a Teddy Bear, which is very
it's
political.
so good. Oh my God.
But it was on mainstream TV, which is like what is, I don't know if we would touch upon, but like,
so good.
yeah, it's really interesting to see the evolution of it, but also like fascinating that for me there's a cynicism in which how we have to play with capitalism in order to get any of this to gain traction. Obviously there's what activists can do or people can do to educate and inform in spaces where they have spaces, but it's really like it looks like it's kind of like dangling a carrot of, this is what's going to get you money if you do more of this, or I don't know.
But it's the capitalist system to begin with. If you want something to be widely shown on TV, on radio, or any mass media, it has to be like, it's going to have to, you're going to fit inside of a capitalist system any sort of way. I mean, you do still have activists who are out there on the street doing it, handing out flyers, but we don't know about them all the way in Narnia, you know.
Because I remember the Cornetto wedding, right, for Earth Mix. I don't know if I watched all of it, but it was just kind of like them like suggesting that they were getting married, but they were doing something. I can't remember what exactly it was. And on one side, it was good that they were able to like promote that message of queer marriage, but on the other hand, it was also promoting Cornetto. So like, I just don't know how to feel about it.
It still got that message out there. It's still we just went for like an hour about were you just not paying attention in the last hour and a half? We were saying
No, but I'm
like,
just saying like, yes, it's good, but also like, I don't feel 100% good
yeah, but then
about all of it.
Thomas also just talked about purity, and were you
I don't
here? Were we
actually know what
in
I
this?
don't actually know what the definition of purity politics is. I was just kind of like nodding along.
Oh my God, were we in the same stream? Like, yeah. So it's purity politics.
I represent the layperson, the lays person. Ding. the lays person. Ding.
Right.
Sorry.
I don't know about a promotion or anything like that, but Lay's will help me.
Lays
wow.
will help us get marriage equality. Okay, I don't. I'll try and absorb all the information Thomas gave us. And yeah, try and be a lot more open-minded moving forward. Yeah. Okay. Thank you everyone for who's watched this live, stuck with us, and hope you all learned something or enjoyed that discussion. Hopefully, we'll be able to do another collaboration with Thomas in the future. We'll try and get in touch maybe about the book launch. I don't know,
Yeah,
but I
that'll
hope
be
you
in
all have a
November.
happy Pride And recommend the channel and video and whatever to all your friends and family, and follow Thomas on Twitter. Yeah, okay. And us on Twitter. Okay. All right. I think that's it. Bye.
See you later.